Let's get into one of the most wild and dramatic stories in all of history. We're talking about how the people of France, crying out for liberty, managed to overthrow a king, plunge their own country into absolute chaos, and then somehow end up with an emperor. It's an incredible journey, really, from the palace gates to the guillotine. And what came after?
Okay, so to really get this, you have to understand the two worlds that existed in France. On one side, you've got the mind blowing luxury of the palace at Versailles. King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette are living this life of just unimaginable wealth, constant parties, crazy entertainment. And then there's the other side, the streets of Paris. That's where we, the common people, are living. We're getting crushed by taxes, the harvest failed again, so there's no bread, and the price of whatever loaf you can find has gone through the roof. There's that famous rumor that the queen said, let them eat cake. Now, she probably never said it, but to us, starting in the streets, it felt true.
And this huge gap between the super rich and the rest of us, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't just bad luck. The whole system was designed this way. It was, from the ground up, a completely unfair kingdom. Just look at this breakdown right here. French society was split into three groups, or estates. You had the first estate, which was the clergy, and the second estate, the nobles. Together, they made up this tiny little slice of the population, like 3%. And then there was everybody else. Merchants, lawyers, workers, peasants, all 26 million of us. We were just lumped together into the third estate, 97% of the entire country.
So here's where it gets truly crazy. The two wealthiest groups, the ones who owned most of the land and had all the power, yeah, they paid basically nothing in taxes. The entire financial weight of the country rested on the shoulders of the third estate, us, the poorest and by far the biggest group. There was this popular drawing that got passed around, it showed a peasant carrying a nobleman and a priest on his back. And that's exactly what it felt like.
Well, after decades of this, something had to break. We, the third estate, got tired of being treated like we were nothing. We decided it was time to become everything.
And in 1789, everything just exploded. The king, desperate for money, calls a meeting of the estates general. For a second, we had hope. But the voting system was a joke, one vote per estate. So the clergy and nobles could always team up to outvote us 2-1. We said, no way. We walked out and declared ourselves the National Assembly, the real voice of the people. The king locked us out of our meeting hall, so we found an indoor tennis court and swore an oath right there not to give up until we had a constitution. Then, in July, everything changed. We heard rumors the king's army was marching on Paris. So we armed ourselves, stormed the Bastille prison, this huge symbol of the king's power, and when it fell, we all knew this wasn't a riot, this was a revolution. You have to understand, this whole thing was powered by these incredible new ideas from thinkers of the Enlightenment. The idea that power comes from the people, not from God or king. And the National Assembly captured that spirit perfectly in the Declaration of the Rights of Man. This one line, men are born and remain free and equal in rights, that was a direct shot at the entire old way of life. It was our promise for a totally new world.
So what's really crucial here is that at the beginning, the goal wasn't even to get rid of the king. It was to create a constitutional monarchy, a system where his power would be limited by a set of laws and our rights as citizens would finally be protected. But, well, the king had other ideas.
All that hope and idealism from 1789, it didn't last. With France facing enemies on all sides and deep divisions at home, the revolution was about to take a very, very dark turn.
In 1791, King Louis tried to run. He dressed up like a servant and tried to flee the country he was supposed to be leading. When he was caught, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. I mean, how could you trust a king who would just abandon his people like that? He was put on trial for treason, found guilty, and on a cold day in January 1793, the king was executed by guillotine. Just like that, the monarchy was gone.
And with the king dead, France declared itself a republic. The new motto was inspiring: liberty, equality, fraternity. But the promise of those beautiful words would soon be drowned in an ocean of blood. This is when things got really scary. As fear and paranoia took over, a radical leader named Maximilien Robespierre grabbed power. He said he had to protect the revolution, and his solution was the Reign of Terror. Basically, anyone could be accused of being an enemy of the revolution for pretty much any reason. The guillotine was working overtime. An estimated 40,000 people were executed. Your neighbors, your friends, anyone could be next. And Robespierre, the guy they once called the incorruptible because he seemed so dedicated to the cause, became a complete tyrant. In the end, his own allies, terrified they'd be next, turned on him. In 1794, Robespierre himself was sent to the guillotine. The terror was finally over, but France was just exhausted, unstable, and desperate for someone to bring back order.
And right into that chaos, a new figure stepped onto the stage. A brilliant, ambitious, and incredibly popular young general who promised to do just that, restore order. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon's rise to power was absolutely stunning. First, he becomes a war hero, winning huge victories for the revolution. Then, in 1799, he uses that fame to just take over the government in a military coup. And then, the final step? In 1804, at Notre Dame Cathedral, he takes the crown from the Pope's hands and places it on his own head. The revolution that started to get rid of one absolute ruler had ended with a new, all-powerful emperor.
But Napoleon wasn't just another military dictator. He was also a reformer. And maybe his greatest legacy was the Napoleonic Code. Before him, France was a total mess of different, confusing, and unequal laws depending on where you lived. He swept all that away and created one single, unified legal system for the whole country. It brought order and, for the first time, a real kind of equality. And this code, it locked in so many of the things we had been fighting for since the beginning. I mean, think about it. Equality for all men in the eyes of the law, a permanent end to the old feudal system, freedom of religion, and this was huge. Jobs in the government were now based on your talent, not who your father was. These were the core ideas of the revolution made real. But we have to point out a huge catch here, a major blind spot. This new equality didn't extend to everyone. The Napoleonic Code actually took away some of the rights women had gained during the revolution, putting them legally under the control of their fathers and husbands.
So Napoleon brought order back to France, but he brought nonstop war to the rest of Europe. His incredible ambition would build a massive empire, but that same ambition would also be the cause of his own downfall.
The beginning of the end was his catastrophic decision to invade Russia in 1812. He marched in with his massive army of over 600,000 soldiers. But the brutal Russian winter, combined with their scorched earth tactics, they just burned everything as they retreated so his army couldn't find food or shelter. It just destroyed his forces. Look at these numbers. Of the 600,000 who went in, less than 40,000 made it out alive. It was a disaster he could never truly recover from. After that, he was weakened. A coalition of other European powers defeated him in 1814 and sent him into exile. But then, in this unbelievable comeback story, he escapes his island prison, lands back in France, and rallies the nation behind him for one last go. His return lasted just 100 days, and it ended for good at the Battle of Waterloo. This time, they exiled him to a remote island in the middle of nowhere, where he would eventually die. But here's the thing. Even though he was defeated, his impact was permanent. Everywhere his armies went, they spread the ideas of the revolution, equality, merit, the end of feudalism. His Napoleonic Code became the model for legal systems all over the world, from Europe to Latin America. And his wars completely redrew the map of Europe, sparking this new feeling of nationalism that would define the next century. So that brings us to the big question, right? What was he? Was he a liberator who saved the best parts of the revolution and spread equality? Or was he a tyrant who hijacked it for his own personal glory? You know, the answer, just like the revolution itself, is incredibly complicated. Maybe, in the end, he was both.